you. Just a little bit of a warning, actually. My subject changed slightly. I'm going to make an argument. And normally when I do this in front of architects, I don't use my own buildings to make the argument. There's a very specific reason for this, is I think the argument stands on its own. And if the audience don't like my buildings, they'll think my argument is no good. But having said that, in this case, I am knowing that I'm with a sympathetic audience. As part of the argument and illustrations, I will include some of my buildings. So I'll tell you what they are, just in case you missed them. But this is not me telling you I'm a great architect or my buildings are wonderful. If you want to look at my buildings, go to my website, it's not a problem. This is about making an argument. And if the argument is, let's see, that's forward. Yes, the argument is, of course, with the subject we're here for, which is beauty. And the trouble is that beauty is rather contested. And in fact, just right at the moment, I hope you can read this, we know that tariff, for example, is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. So unfortunately, Donald Trump has actually kidnapped the word and used it for just about everything. But he's not alone. Will Alsop, actually he's dead now, but he's a friend of mine. He and I have been involved in debates. We don't like one another's architecture, but we do agree architecture should be beautiful. The problem is we actually don't agree on what beautiful is. And here we have Raphael Vignoli saying that he's looking for beauty and harmony in the city. Interestingly, he was actually awarded the British Carbuncle Cup for that building as built stiff competition in a vintage year for ugly architecture. Interesting thing about that particular competition, when that was done, it was out to a public vote. But very quickly, the architectural profession kidnapped it and decided they would make it a committee of architects deciding that instead of the public. But I'm not going to talk about ugliness, because, absence of beauty, probably a bit more than that. Unpleasant and repulsive is another view, but I think beauty is better. But I'm also, just one or two things I'm probably going to upset a few people now, but debate is good. This is the other one, timelessness. I have a bit of a problem with this, because lots of people decide to call their buildings timeless, including Toyo Ito, which I wouldn't call timeless, and maybe actually Robert Gray's, the Portland building actually is very much used the thing of its time. And of course, in my opinion, timeless is a nonsense word. Clearly, 5 billion years ago, when the universe was in formation, none of my buildings were beautiful. In fact, I don't think it could be a concept of beautiful because there wasn't anyone around. And I think probably when the dinosaurs were around, I'm sure dinosaurs weren't assessing the beauty of things, or they might have done in a kind of evolutionary way. And I'm not sure Neanderthal view of. So clearly, when we're talking about anything, we're talking about it in a period of time. And so timelessness is a sort of non-word, really. It's not of any great use, in my opinion. However, throughout history, people have been very keen to establish what is beautiful. In the Middle Ages, there's a lot of number symbolism. That's the Abbé Suger, that's the columns at Saint-Denis, the abbey at Saint-Denis, where each column represents a disciple. A lot of number symbolism, the idea that somehow you were representing in number or symbol the Gospels. Or you have the Platonic solids, fire, air, earth, water, and universe. But I think the key one, and I'll come back to this, is that both in paganism and in Christianity, man is made in the image of God. Now, you can regard that as a metaphor, which I think everyone does now, but it was actually taken very literally. So if you got the ideal person, and I'll get to the ideal person in a minute, if you get the ideal person, of course, that is actually what God or the gods are like. And therefore, the proportions and the nature of the ideal person are, of course, beautiful, because they are God or gods. I don't hold this view at the moment, but people did, and maybe people in the audience do. However, it's interesting, I quote the Roman author Vitruvius, who actually said classical architecture, I do the Latin, our veris naturae deducta, is derived from the true things of nature, which I think is a pretty good motto as it goes. But the human figure is important to us. I just put this up for illustration. This this is, I had to put this is done on surveys, the fact that they're white, and I have to be very careful about this because the samples were 40 UK students or 100 UK students, so obviously, but this was the idea of the most beautiful faces or the ideal bodies. But I'm not going to dwell on this too long, because I think there is an important thing about this. I mean, I don't think it works in some respects, but our ability to the biological and evolutionary importance of looking at people and looking at the way people are, and our ability to recognize minor differences in people and so on, I think it has an evolutionary purpose. I'm not going to go into this, I think others will. Things like symmetry, bilateral symmetry, complexity, closeness to nature, defensible space, intimacy of space. You can put an evolutionary picture on these things. I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to leave that one in the air. I think others may talk about that. But there are, the understanding beauty in evolution and how it happens. I mean, I show a peacock. It's an example of runaway evolution. The early peacocks had just sort of vaguely bushy tails. But the peahen would choose one with the bushiest tail, and so the next generation would have bushy, and so it goes on. It's called runaway evolution. Interesting, I showed here the Wudabe tribe in Chad, where the women choose the men at a particular ceremony, and the men dress up and jump up and down to look as beautiful as possible. And these are the men of the Wudabe tribe in Chad. This is part of the evolutionary process, and in my opinion, we are a product of evolution. I chose a picture of Wendy Deng and Rupert Murdoch. It's very clear that Wendy Deng didn't choose Rupert Murdoch because he was beautiful, but there was a very good evolutionary reason for choosing Rupert Murdoch, and they got divorced quite quickly, and she got the money. But dealing with the human form in literally in architecture it doesn't quite work. This is the first of my buildings, actually, not the one on the right, but the one on the left, which was a garden pavilion I designed for a competition. Of course, it was never built. So that doesn't operate. We've got to go to something else. And the other thing is in all of this, what we're all desperate to do is to find something really specific and formulaic to hold on to. And I'm now going to upset lots of people, because this is one of them. This is the golden section, or Fibonacci series, and so on. And I think it is well established that the first time that this was ever mentioned in literature, indirectly in connection with architecture, was 1854 by Adolf Zeesing. And the title of the book, and the way they gave titles, explains the whole thing. I hope you can read that. I'm not going to read it out. If you can't read it, I'll read it out. So, and there's no question about it, the so-called golden section, the Fibonacci series. Fibonacci series, actually discovered by Fibonacci, was actually to do with the breeding of rabbits. But, that's another story. And it has remarkable qualities. There's no question about that. But it's been put on a rather alarming pedestal. It's kind of become a cult. Back to Donald Trump. I'm not entirely sure what the Mona Lisa's right wrist has got to do with her nose, but clearly that's significant. And it seems that the relationship between the Mona Lisa and a Picasso, if you actually put these rectangles on it, basically you can find it wherever you want it. But if you actually Google this, it's amazing the claims people make of the golden section. Pyramids, Mesoamerican architecture and everything. And people will just find it everywhere. And they find it, of course, in architecture. And they can get carried away, I have to say. And of course, actually, Zeising actually illustrated the Parthenon, for some reason regarded as the peak of classicism. It's interesting, of course, if you use a small enough picture, you can actually make the golden section work on the outside of the cornice, or you can make it work on the inside of the entablature, depending where you want to find it. And this one here of San Pietro in Montorio in Rome, it goes at the bottom of the cornice on one of the rectangles and the top of the cornice on the other. So, I'm afraid it's and the other thing is, if you're very vague about this, of course, and a small piece, a 5x3 rectangle is so close to the golden section in graphic terms. And the one thing we do know is that a whole number of proportions were widely used and written about. The only irrational one is actually the root 2 rectangle, which is A-size paper. So I'm very cautious, and what made me particularly cautious about the golden section is that other people use it. The idea that somehow this is going to make your buildings beautiful, I think is really not the point. The next thing I really want to go on to, having dismissed timelessness in the golden section and upset at least half of you, anyway, debate is good, is the fact that in beauty we're always looking for a constant. It may lie in evolutionary things, which is as good as a constant as we get. But we need to remember that things that we regard as beautiful were not always regarded as beautiful. Mountains, for example, were just regarded, here we have a painting 1445, which is regarded as annoying things it was difficult to get over, or possibly useful places on which to put fortifications. But then we have Caspar Friedrich, where the idea in the Romantic area, the idea of mountains and the idea of the sublime came in. So attitudes to mountains changed. I regard mountains as beautiful. I don't think in the Middle Ages they regarded mountains as beautiful. Or we take ruins. Here we have a painting at the top from 1340 and 1460. Ruins in the Middle Ages were just regarded as rather unpleasant, incomplete buildings, preferably suitable for stealing materials to build nicer buildings. But on the other hand, by the Romantic period, here we have a painting from 1841, ruins were regarded as wonderful things, as things that you could give you some romantic idea of the passage of time and the decay of mankind and so on and so on. So, our attitude as regards the beauty of ruins has changed. And then I choose the one on the top. On the top left, as very common in the 19th century, people like to photograph slums for sort of social thing. Now, interestingly, I don't think that the people that lived in these slums, 5 to a room, was sitting in the room thinking, doesn't matter, I haven't got any sanitation and so on. This is a beautiful building. And of course, in the 19th century, they didn't regard these buildings as beautiful. Right now, here's a picture at the bottom. These small houses go for about £1 million. So attitudes, I'm afraid the attitudes do change. The other attitude that changes, at least slightly, our attitude to other forms of beautiful art. Here are Tibetan dancers. This is a social Darwinism. This was a prominence in the 19th century, that this was regarded as kind of primitive art, and therefore was a kind of, if you like, a stage on the way to Western art. It was not regarded as good in its own right. It was regarded as a sort of curiosity. Or the other one is, and this is led to Edwin Lutyens, and that's a Jain temple, which he called a monstrous riot of nonsense. The Indians have never forgiven him for his attitude, and quite rightly, actually. So, again, these things are culturally determined. So, broadly speaking, I forgot actually the Reichskanzlei, which undoubtedly in 1938 was regarded as beautiful, but at the time it had been destroyed, everyone decided not only is it not beautiful, but it represented something fundamentally evil. But so I think we can establish that we don't, I personally, other than possibly going to metaphors for evolutionary process, is that beauty is not a constant. It's something that is culturally determined. To help us with this, I go going to Fernand Braudel, the Annales School historian. This is, in my opinion, an extremely important concept, which applies very widely, is that time does not move. We have clocks that regulate time, but things change at different rates. And here we had événement, which are events, conjoncture, were conditions, and longue durée, which is long time. And historically, that's battles, that's the reign of a Norwegian king, I thought it would be suitable. And there's Norway, and it's geographic. His book, Méditerranée, studied. This is very useful, because one of the problems about changing things is, it's just fashion. Well, fashion is something that moves quickly. I didn't dress like that in the 70s, but lots of people did, and I don't think anyone really regards that as particularly beautiful now. That kind of furniture in the middle, interestingly, became very popular, has popular for around about 50 years. Now you can buy these things for next to nothing. They become very, young people don't regard these as beautiful. And then at the end we have the longue durée. We have the attitude to ancient Greece, which lasts about 250 years. It wasn't automatic. So I put another picture, another thing on this one. This is Henry Teifel and social identity theory, which is the principle that self-esteem, purpose, and identity are in groups. But in-groups have a negative side to them because they always have an out-group. And of course, Teifel was a Polish refugee from Nazi Germany, so he was concerned that, in fact, the in-group and out-group, which is a natural process, was actually had a very dark side to it. The other one is Pierre Bourdieu and the idea of cultural capital. You have, at the bottom, you have, if you like, class capital, and you might have economic capital. He says cultural capital, where being cultured put you in a particular group and gave you a superiority. So we can put these things together. And here we have two paintings, one by Stanley Whitney in 1992, someone called Jack Vetriano. Notice how the critics treat him. Jack Vetriano made more than 1 million, I mean, he may or may not like the painting, but it sold 1 million copies. It sold for 9 million kroner, or $950,000, and now we have to speak in yuan, so 7 million yuan. Whereas Stanley Whitney, his painting sold for only $50,000. So you put the market on it. So you may not like this, but the art critics say we've got to learn not to like it. So basically, the problem with learning not to like it is that immediately destroys. If you teach everybody not to like Jack Vetriano and to like this, you're no longer in an exclusive group. This has a problem. And we get the same thing with housing. And this is one of my buildings, by the way. But I use that as a model for every time this building comes on the market, people ask me to make another one. This is in Perth in Australia. So we know on the open market is that most people prefer traditional buildings. And we know this from surveys. This is a survey done some in the 90s, which I was involved with, where the question was asked both ways. This was done by a British institution which I was on, Commission for Architecture and Built Environment. When they got these results that most people like traditional buildings, they decided they hadn't really commissioned this. They put it in a drawer and decided to forget it. I found it. And this is the other one. This is why I said I give Robbie Patchka a name check here. This is one we commissioned. And the two modernist buildings won awards, basically. And this is very, very carefully done so that each building's the same position, same sky, same number of people, done by a professional firm. But that was the result. Very, very clear cut. And you see it as well in the competitions. Again, this is the Driehaus Prize. That's Leo Krier. That, again, I just pointed out as one of my buildings. It's very obvious. This is one in-group deciding that this is an out-group. This is another in-group deciding that is an out-group. And the same applies here. This is in Britain. Again, the top building is mine. The bottom building is Ross Sharp. Again, very obvious. So there we are. Again, I had to pick one of my buildings to illustrate this. What kind of judgment do you make? Well, you make a reasonable judgment. We are all producing buildings not for ourselves, we're producing them for people in the public. We have a good idea of what the public think is beautiful, very well demonstrated and very clear. So if you need anything to operate on beauty, it should be beautiful to you as a designer, but it should also be beautiful to the wider group of people. There is no moral argument against that, except trying to teach the public what they should think. When we did this piece of research, I reckon there'd be 4 arguments against this. You can prove anything with statistics. This is a result you wanted. People should be educated, and I don't care. A particular architectural journalist managed to get all those 4 points into 600 words. I did congratulate him. It's the idea that somehow the public ought to be taught to do what we want, what the architectural profession want, not what they want themselves. And so I think other people will talk about certain aspects of beauty in the evolutionary sense, I think that's all we've got. That's anything that's objective. So I'm going to be shorter than my time. Told I got 5 minutes. I'll wrap it on for another 5 minutes if you like. But no, I've nearly finished. I only put this because tourism is an interesting aspect of this. You get these public votes on, where is the most beautiful buildings, what's the most beautiful places to go. And this is one of them. And you'll notice there's a reasonable consistency about these things. The other interesting thing is actually their place specificity. And it is that actually they kind of belong to the places that they come from. They operate within the traditions of the places they come from. So, I mean, in a way, I kind of rest my case, is that beauty is not an absolute. We can't find an absolute on it. It's certainly not timeless, because everything exists in time. But we do have a measure, and the measure must be, it's only reasonable that it be what is widely regarded as beautiful. And we can be reasonably sure that we are, not absolutely sure, that we're dealing with a relatively long time scale as a conscious of being timeless. I mean, it will change. We know that in the 19th century, they didn't like 18th century architecture, and they kind of dolled it up. That's the way it goes. But, you know, in my opinion, there is no absolute. So there it is. If you want to read more, I didn't have time, actually, to deal with the importance of traditions and what traditions are, because actually traditions are really fundamental things about identity. And I don't have the time to do that because that's a whole other 25-minute lecture. But I do cover that, how traditions are the key to identity, and how they in turn have a evolutionary and biological origin. And of course, we're all talking about traditional architecture, so understanding tradition must be very important. So if you will rush out and buy this book, which I hope you will, I've got to sell it somehow, you will find that dealt with in great depth. So thank you very much. Thank you.